Afternoon, everyone. My name is Philippa McRae. I'm presenting this afternoon on the Vocational Intervention Program, which is a piece of work that's been 10 years in the making, and it was a program that was implemented by the Agency for Clinical Innovation and funded by iCare. Just to provide some context, there was concern raised within the New South Wales Brain Injury Rehabilitation Services some 10 years ago about experiences of clients attempting to return to work. We weren't sure exactly what the issues were, we weren't sure what the outcomes were, but we were fairly sure there was a problem. So we embarked on an outcome study in order to understand this better. And so over this period, data was analysed for the 721 active clients of the New South Wales Brain Injury Rehabilitation Program, or from here on, the BURPs. And those people all had a TBI, and as a result of that study, we found they had a return to work rate of only 29% post-injury. Around this same time, CRS Australia was disbanded. And so a new model was developed, and it was called the Vocational Intervention Program, or the VIP, which operates under a model of service integration involving partnerships that are formed between the individual BURP teams and local vocational providers. Firstly, a pilot program, which is VIP1, was implemented in 6 of the 12 BURP sites, and that involved only 3 providers. Then further support from iCare enabled the upscaling of this program to the whole state, which is the 12 sites and involved 20 vocational providers. And it is this program, or the VIP2, that is the focus of today's presentation. The evaluation for VIP2 was quite extensive. I'm only talking about the outcomes today, but if you're interested in other things like cost-benefit analysis, then I'm sure you can find the evaluation report on iCare's website. Turning firstly to program establishment, 20 providers were appointed to partnerships across our 12 BURP teams. In order to have access to all available funding schemes, we selected providers that worked under the Disability Employment Services Program, or the DES, as well as other providers who worked within insurance schemes. Each of the BURP teams had more than one partnering provider, ranging between 3 to 7 partners, which amounted in total to 53 partnerships across all the 12 sites. 16 of these partnerships were already existing, that is, the BURP teams and the providers already had formed a connection together, but the remaining 36 were new providers. They didn't know each other existed. Even in small places like Dubbo, they didn't know each other existed. Following the appointment of the providers, a one-day training program was delivered at each of the sites with both the clinicians or the brain injury rehab teams and the providers present together for the one day of training. There was 2 interventions available for within VIP, and we termed them Fast Track and New Track. Fast Track is return to same employer, and New Track is assisting people to locate new employment. And there's nothing new about that. The division between same employer and new employer services within vocational rehab has existed forever. And turning to our sample, we had 227 clients that were referred to VIP over the 2-year period of the study, exceeding our target of 200 referrals, which is what we're hoping to achieve. Of the 61 individuals referred to Fast Track, 47 proceeded to the program, and of the 166 referred to New Track, 132 proceeded to program. Some people didn't proceed to program for an array of reasons, but they were referred, and for whatever reason they then didn't go ahead. But we did have collectively 179 people who did commence a VIP pathway. So who were they? The participant profile aligned with a population of severe brain injury. So 72% of the group were male with an average age of 37 years. 72% of the group had sustained a TBI that was either very severe or extremely severe. Approximately 40% of participants were in Metro Sydney. The remaining 60% were in our regional areas. In comparing the 2 Fast Track and New Track groups, and you'll see this in the yellow colour, The time post-injury differed between the two interventions, so we only had, on average, 8 months post-injury for our fast-track participants and 18.5 months for new-track participants. And almost all fast-track participants, at 98%, were employed at the time of their injury, which is fairly expected. If you're going back to an employer, you must have held employment at the time of the injury, compared with only 69% of new-track participants. I alluded before about having providers that were aligned with funding sources because this program was funded through existing funding schemes, and so people had to fit into a funding scheme. And so here we see that 36% of the group were funded through eye care schemes, so typically lifetime care, with a few workers' care, a few workers' insurance. Followed by the DES, so again about a third of the group were non-compensable and were funded through a registration with a DES provider. And then there were some other insurance schemes such as income protection, NDIS, only 7% of clients at that time. We had some additional funding for people who didn't fit a funding scheme at the time, and that's what that project funding of 27 individuals refers to. Now turning our attention to the outcomes. We had 47 people who commenced a fast-track program, and along the journey, 7 withdrew from the program. 6 transferred across to new track when their return to work attempt with their pre-injury employer was unsuccessful, and 7 were still in progress at program conclusion. But of course, we had 27 people who completed the program, and 26 of those were in stable employment with their pre-injury employer at the end of the project. However, we know that 6 of the ongoing cases were in work, and as was one of those who had withdrawn. So using the more generous formula for calculating the return to work rate, actually 33 people of the 47 resumed their pre-injury employment through this program, which was a return to work rate for fast track of 70.2%. The new track activities and outcomes were much more variable. 132 people commenced the new track pathway, a much higher demand than for fast track. A greater proportion then dropped out of the program, with 50 people completing new track. 33 of these 50 achieved new paid jobs, and mostly that was in mainstream employment. You'll see there's only 5 individuals who were in supported employment, so that's, I guess, employment that is not a regular position in mainstream employment, but that is in a disability enterprise or similar. In addition to the 33 who were in paid work, there was another 17 individuals who completed a milestone of some description, such as a training course or volunteer work or a work trial placement, and they were all stepping stones for those individuals in their journey to achieving new employment. So with, I guess, 33 people in paid work at program conclusion is a return to work rate of only 35% for this group. However, again, if we use the more generous formula and we include people who did alternate vocational activities, then really 53% of the group were involved in a productive activity during their new track program. We were, I suppose, a bit concerned by the rate of program attrition here, particularly for new track, because we saw that 44 people dropped out of the new track pathway along the way. But I guess it's not surprising when you consider the array of factors involved in employment participation. And here is the categories for people dropping out of the program over time, but certainly there's factors related to the employer. These factors are outside of, the control of the program. We had COVID, of course, in our second year of intervention, and that certainly impacts on employment opportunities. There were medical, there were legal processes, and people's life circumstances change at any point, and so that really collectively accounted for the reasons for our withdrawal from program. 3 factors distinguish the group who dropped out of the program from the group who achieved a productive outcome. Those 3 on the right of your screen are time post-injury. So as you can imagine, those with more recent injuries were more likely to achieve employment. Injury severity and location, with people in metro locations were more likely to achieve an outcome than their rural counterparts. The other variables did not differ between the two groups, so the type of injury, whether it was ABI, whether it was TBI, whether they were serviced through a private provider or a DES provider, these factors did not distinguish those who did complete the program versus those who dropped out. One of our research questions was, did VIP impact on quality of life? And to this end, 4 client-rated measures were collected at program commencement and then again at case closure. And those measures were the Depression, Anxiety, Stress Scale, the SF-36, the General Self-Efficacy Scale and the Rosenberg Self-Esteem Scale. Of those measures, there were 2 that showed a difference across the 2 time points. So the depression subscore of the DAS improved significantly, and the physical component of the SF-36 also showed improvement score between commencement and achieving employment. But it's really worth noting that many of the scores are in the normal range at baseline. This was not a group that was distressed, and therefore it's very difficult to find significant improvements when they're not low at the point of commencement. So with a sample size of 179 participants, the VIP2 was the largest vocational implementation study for people with severe TBI in Australia to date. Durable employment outcomes were achieved for 26 fast track and 33 new track participants. Failure to engage in productive activity related to injury, the amount of time post-injury particularly for new track participants. Lack of opportunities in rural regions was a real issue, and I suppose lack of provider options in rural regions also was one of our issues, and injury severity and injury complexity also. However, we have established some strong and enduring partnerships in many of our regions, and the VIP certainly positioned return to work more prominently on the rehabilitation agenda within our BERP teams. We've developed resources to guide return to work navigation, and it is very difficult to navigate. I think anyone who's worked in community rehabilitation might get to someone with an employment goal and pull up, because how do we do that? Where do we go? It's confusing. Do I take them to Centrelink? What on earth will happen down there? So the pathways we're able to navigate and provide resources along those lines are very helpful. Those resources are still available for use within the BERPs. And really importantly today, iCare continues to support the Agency for Clinical Innovation to maintain the VIP as part of normal rehabilitation practice. So the really good thing is that further funding has been provided to continue coordination of the VIP across the state into the future. However, I suppose there's still some continued challenges in trying to manage this or trying to achieve employment in this context of a service system relationship. We had a lot of difficulties working within the DES framework. The DES is certainly not designed for a graded return to work process. It's a disability program, and it's not graded it's not designed to enable a very gradual re-entry back into the workforce. They also tend not to, as a group, DES providers employ allied health staff, and I suppose that seemed to be a gap in our minds in terms of understanding the needs of this client group. We had 2 rural sites in particular where we really just weren't able to secure partnerships with DES providers in a couple of regions, and that's an outstanding problem. And then as this program was wrapping up in July 2021, the government announced that they were going to change the eligibility for DES and further restrict eligibility such that only income beneficiaries or those on a Centrelink payment are now eligible for a DES program, whereas before it was anyone with a disability. So there's a number of clients, of course, who don't receive for varying reasons an income from Centrelink, and they therefore are not eligible for a DES program. The other thing, I suppose, from a design of a program perspective is that we were very inclusive in trialling 20 providers. What the downfall of that, of course, is that there's a real dispersal of referrals across so many providers, and I guess that then affects the development of expertise. And also develops the strength of the relationship. We had, for instance, the Hunter team had 6 providers, so how do you form a relationship with 6 providers? But intentionally we did that so that we could try a number of providers so that we'd see the best fit for each of the services. I guess I just want to acknowledge, and many of you are in the room today, but I certainly want to acknowledge the sponsorship by iCare. It wouldn't have happened without that commitment over the full 10 years from iCare, and certainly the Brain Injury Rehabilitation Director at ACI were the implementers of this program. The BURP clinicians, the BURP clients put a lot of time and effort into the evaluation to help us gather the information, and the VOC rehab providers are very dedicated to being involved also in the study. We had some great expertise in research led by Graham Simpson, who's here, but and also ASRI, the Australian Health Services Research Institute, who University of Wollongong, who helped with the economic evaluation. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Time for one question or a comment, if anyone has a question for Phil.
I went to the training a few years back in the North Coast, and then had participants who have been referred. How does it, if someone with a brain injury just turns up at one of the providers who was in the program, will they just automatically go into that, or do they still need to be referred specifically to that program?
Well, the process really, because it is a partnership model, was that the case managers at the Brain Injury Service will make contact with the provider, see they had capacity and are in a position to help, see that they had a funding source that would fit, make that referral, and then it's a collaboration really to have a joint assessment together. So really, by design of the model, it's about that collaborative piece. So that's the direction of things. Yeah. You were a provider or in the North Coast?
A case manager who did the training.
I'm
just wondering if it's how it works ongoing, still the same system, still.
Yeah. Yeah, so.
I'm just curious about the particular providers we had up our way. If someone was just to present their service with a brain injury, whether they would get picked up automatically or whether they had to.
It's really best that the case managers of the BURPs are integral to that process to secure the commencement. Yeah. Terrific. Thank you.
We should move to the next speaker. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Deborah Byrne. I'm from the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. Initially, the presentation, when the conference was first, going to be held 2 years ago, was around our disclosure project, the who, what, how, where, why project. Because of the delay in the project, I'll also be presenting today just briefly on its successor, which is the the Employ Me project. So these projects are certainly on a much smaller scale than our previous speaker. So we know that there's lots of stats and lots of research that say despite people with brain injury making excellent employers, that looking for or retaining employment can be really difficult for people with brain injury. And we know that one of the barriers for people is knowing how to disclose the details about their brain injury and how it can impact their ability to perform a role. So, sorry, I've been doing lots of talking about the National Assistance Card, so I'm just hoping that my voice hangs in for the rest of the session. So in 2019, the Brain Injury Association of Tasmania, we applied for an NDIS Information Linkages and Capacity Building Economic Participation Grant. It was a 12-month grant, and I don't have enough time here today to talk about the shortfalls of the ILC program and 12-month grants and how it doesn't give you enough time really to do anything. But the project actually focused on ensuring people with brain injury who were seeking employment had control over and were empowered to choose what and how they wanted potential employees and other people to know about them and or their brain injury. So what we did, we held some workshops across the state at which there were lots of really robust discussions around sort of the project outcomes and the resources. And I think one project participant, he said that the goal of the project should be to remove stigma, reduce the risk and focus on the strengths. And I think that this statement actually goes to the core of what the disclosure project aimed to achieve. So the concept of a disclosure video was discussed, and everyone agreed that a personalised video would be a really useful tool for people. So people talked about how a disclosure tool such as a video could be used repeatedly by a person, how it could educate employers and others about various disabilities and the associated impacts in a way that minimised that burden of communication on individuals. Quite often we hear people sort of get, they get really tired of having to tell their story over and over and over again to a whole range of different people. So with this in mind, what the project did, it focused on the use of a video as a disclosure tool to provide a mechanism for really deeply personal issues to be communicated in a professional and a less personal way. So there was a toolkit of resources that were designed and that were developed for people with brain injury who were thinking about or looking for employment, or perhaps further education and or volunteering opportunities, for DES providers working with people with brain injury, for employers who were looking to employ people with brain injury. And what we found, although we hadn't initially considered people returning to their pre-injury employer, we did include this based on the feedback that we received from the consultations. So for those of you that perhaps have ILC projects, you know that a key component of that is that co-design aspect. So once the resources were developed, the project officer worked through the resources sort of with the participants. So what was co-developed, there was an employment journey self-assessment, some talking brain injury cards which supported people to think about their strengths, their interests and their employment goals. That then fed into a participant profile performer, and that was actually compiled with the person but also in conjunction with their families or perhaps other support people. So it was really important that they were involved in that process so that people weren't set up to fail. And perhaps a really good example of that, we know that some people with brain injury may not have that insight into their capacity sometimes. So it might have been the question was asked, how many days a week would you like to work? And it's like, oh, I'd like to work 5 days a week. But it might have been that their family member or support worker or health worker would say, well, perhaps, 5 days might be a bit much to start with, let's try 3 days to start with. So that participant pro forma, that was then used to create the video. And it was used so if the person wasn't sure of what it was that they wanted to say, the prompts that were given by either the project officer or the videographer, they were the prompts that were actually the person's own words. It wasn't us coming up with things for them. If people wanted, a personal story was used to supplement the video. But what it did, it actually gave people the opportunity to consider those other aspects about themselves, not just the brain injury, and that was certainly something that was picked up in the opening address of this conference. So in terms of to facilitate the project evaluation process, the self-assessment and the evaluation tool, which as we said was co-designed, looked at 3 key employment areas. So it looked at that looking and preparing for work, the confidence and person's confidence and motivation, and that finding and keeping a job. So what it did was it supported people with brain injury to look at where they were on the scale of regarding their current status, their employment goals, and to put a plan in place and to stay motivated and be confident in their employment journey. That process also enabled people to identify what was really important to them and what goals they wanted to focus on regarding their employment, and to identify what they actually needed to do to progress on their journey. Something was a little bit unique about this project that we were really proud of. So as I said, we partnered with some DES providers, and what we learned was quite often with a DES provider is they get a client and it's like, you're my client, you're mine now, you can't go anywhere else. So what we did, we had an agreement with the DES providers. So it was a unique arrangement where a participant's video went to all of the partner DES providers. So this was people that weren't actually linked in with a DES provider. So the video went to all of the DES providers. All DES providers then looked for those employment opportunities for the person, and the DES provider that found the job for the person and supported them, then that person then went to that DES provider. So what it really did was it maximised those employment opportunities, but it also maximised that understanding for the DES providers around brain injury and about people as well. We worked with some Monash University students, some OT students, in developing some of our resources, and that was a really great opportunity for these students to learn about brain injury, but also to develop resources in plain English, which was a really interesting exercise for them. And we also worked with a videographer with experience working with people with brain injury, and that was really important because he was able to develop a rapport with people, and it was important that people actually felt comfortable with the videographer. So that was important as well. So similar to the previous project, we sort of got to the point where we had the videos, the DES providers had the videos all ready to look for employment, but then COVID hit and nobody was getting employment. So given that we're a really small organisation, we were really proud of the outcomes that we achieved given the COVID restrictions. All of the participants reported that they felt more comfortable sharing information about their brain injury since being involved in the project, and particularly since making their video, and a lot of people, they were really proud of their video. So we had a high number of employers reported that they'd be more open to employing a person with brain injury as a result of seeing the person's video. All DES providers involved in the project reported that they and their staff had an increased awareness and knowledge of brain injury since being involved in the project. And the other thing that we were really pleased about, that whilst it was that economic participation in employment wasn't the only goal. It was around capacity building, and we had one gentleman that was really socially isolated before being involved in the project, engaging with us, doing the video. He didn't end up getting employment, but he was on a panel. We did a Mental Health Week presentation and he was on that panel. He came along and presented at our AGM about the employment project, and then he went on to work with Flourish in a volunteer capacity, which is a mental health organisation. So that was a really great outcome, although he didn't actually get employment. So the findings from both the disclosure surveys and your employment journey self-assessment and evaluation, I guess it corroborates by its assertion that the disclosure project did support people living with brain injury to increase their skills, their confidence and capacity, and it certainly met that objective around empowering people to choose what and how they wanted employers and others to know about them or their disability. And when we talk about others, it could be someone going into a new job. Once again, I don't want to have to tell everyone about my brain injury. Here, can you watch my video? So the video, it is uploaded to YouTube, but it is a private YouTube link, and so only the person that has that link can share it. So the person with the participant had the link. They agreed at going to the DES provider, but they were then able to share that if they wanted to. So one of our success stories, her name isn't Mary, but I'll call her Mary. So participation in the development of her disclosure video increased Mary's skills and confidence to look for work. She wasn't actually linked to a DES provider when she came to us, but interacted all the work, and they supported her and also the Glebe Cafe as well. What we found too, that there's broader applicability of that video process, and this was sort of, I guess, a bit of a byproduct. So we had a sort of an association with a client that particularly challenging, that with his service provider was going through a lot of staff, and they were having real problems, getting staff to go. And you'd probably be aware that, for some people, in terms of support, no support is better than the wrong support. And so what would happen with this person, they'd have staff that didn't know him turning up, and it would go wrong very quickly. So we used that video concept. He came along, we did the methodology in terms of working with him. He produced a video, the NDIS paid for it, which was really great. It went back to his service provider, and now they have it in place that any staff member that's going to support this person has to watch his video. We had another gentleman that was having real problems in his community, still very actively involved in his local footy club, but, his mates didn't understand the brain injury. They would go out on a social night, get him either really drunk, or if he chose to stay sober, they would get him to drive from, Huonville, into Hobart, which is a good sort of 40, 50-minute drive, which was really fatiguing. And he was trying to tell them around his brain injury. So once again, as part of his community participation, the NDIS paid for a video to be done, and he was able to then use that, and the president of the local footy club was part of that video as well. So, and we also had TAC funded a video for a gentleman that same sort of thing, got sick of communicating all the time to his staff how he wanted to be supported, so that video concept, we were able to use that as well. So the full disclosure project report, we did a lot of evaluation on it. It wasn't sort of like a study as such, but we evaluated it, and that can be found on the BIA website. And what I found is that, in most instances, it's the person with lived experience that, has the most impact in terms of presentation. So I thought what I would do is share with you one of the videos, which I'm hoping is going to work. Yep.
I'm Andy Rodman. I live with an acquired brain injury and I live in Hobart. I enjoy activities. I enjoy sailing, singing with the choir of High Ups Hobart when there are performances, and also going for walks with my family or people that enjoy walking. I sustained my acquired brain injury 21 years ago in Melbourne when I was out of a hospital and got hit by a concrete truck, and I had a brain shunt, and also it's enabled me to actually be one of the lucky ones where I can judge distance fairly well, but with a minor disability. Some of the impacts of my brain injury include memory, concentration, and balance, and coordination, and also mental fatigue after a long period. Mental fatigue after a long period is I'll lose an eye for detail and become tired or less capable of doing things, and it'd be like an orientation of being very, very extremely tired when you're fatigued. Some of the things I do well are an eye on detail, being focused and handling money and being honest, and communicating and talking with people and being punctual. Some of the supports I may require include a flexible hours and a supportive employer. What is very important for me is listing dot points to enable me to work more productively, and also with point form I concentrate a lot better and am able to work much more efficiently. The reason I need someone to support me in a job is self-recognition, personal achievement, and feeling like I'm actually needed in the workplace. It's important for me to work to earn an income so I'm able to do things like enjoy leisure activities like have a meal out, or just a self-recognition, and someone in my local suburb or even in the middle of Hobart might say, oh, you work at this particular spot, I've seen you. I'd like to work in cafes or restaurants because my expertise is in food handling and actually customer feedback, and actually being recognised with a smile on my face by people when they arrive in a cafe or restaurant saying, hello Andy, how are you? I like to communicate and actually socialise and work with other people, because some of the feedback, even at Hamlet when I'm training, you get to feel a sense of accomplishment. I went from kitchen after about the first 2 months to front of house, and I'm learning a lot more, and the whole idea behind me being trained at Hamlet, they'll teach me how to become more expertise in working in restaurants and cafes to gain a bigger skill so I can actually get employment. Ideally I'd like to work 8 or 10 hours a week, and in a way it would be good if it was split hours. It'd be more efficient for me and more appropriate for me to have separate days. I like to share things with people and communicate, and I really like meeting new people and making them welcome when I'm in the workplace, to feel more like I'm looking after customers, and some feedback from them is something I find is I'll say a pleasure. I feel like my biggest strength is customer service, from what I get from a feeling of satisfaction when I've looked after people, and it's what I'm an expert or try to be in, is looking after people and making them feel welcome.
Yeah, unfortunately, COVID hit and all our cafes shut. So, yeah, Andy loves to chat. But we had another lady that, I don't like people, so she actually got a job working in a nursery, a plant nursery, and it was perfect for her. So, you can see they're really great videos, and how, sending that to a DES provider would give them an understanding of the kind of role that a person wanted, and then to be able to provide that to an employer ahead of an interview makes it a lot easier for people. So it was a 12-month project. We were lucky that we applied for and were successful in receiving a further 12-month grant to build on the disclosure project. And this one's a little bit different. So it's to take that methodology and the resources and see if we can adapt them for young people with disability. So we've partnered with the Association for Children with Disability, rural and remote. I've got a project officer working with Brain Injury Matters around that to see whether it worked for people with brain injury in other states. And we've partnered with Brain Injury South Australia and Brain Injury Matters in Victoria. And part of the project was around working with First Nations people with brain injury. But it was really disappointing. We could not get an organisation to engage with us around that, even though there was money attached to it, no matter how hard we tried. But because of the really great work that the Association for Children with Disability have done, we managed to get the funds diverted so that we can continue the work that they're doing with young people. So we've developed a really comprehensive implementation guide just to ensure some consistency across all of the partners. This one's a little bit different too, because what it does, the part of the project which is to adapt the methodology involves employing people with either brain injury or young people with disability. So they are actually employed in the project to work with the organisations to adapt that. So there is an employment outcome there. And the other thing we changed with this one is around the videography. The first one we had small numbers and we used a videographer. With this one what we've done is we've upskilled the project officers, but we've also found, particularly with the Association for Children with Disability, they've got some young people with disability that are interested in videography that have also been trained. They are then employed to do the videography when we go to the next stage of the project. So they're videoing their peers, which is really great. The other thing, one of the resources is around the cards. One of my real concerns around working with people with disability, and particularly in short-term projects, is that we get people, we get them involved, we do the project, we then say there's no more funding for the project, and we say thank you very much, off you go again, and then we get them back out again when the next project comes along. And I wonder sometimes whether we're doing more harm than good. So we came up with a concept of doing some cards, and the cards are something that people are left with at the end of the project. They can have those cards and they can, you know, I'm going into an interview, I just want to reaffirm, you know, these are my strengths, or I'm going to do something, I can just have a look at my cards and it just, you know, they focus on my strength and what's, you know, things that are good about me. And part of this project too was the requirement, some of the people for Brain Injury Matters wanted the cards developed into workbooks that they could work through. As I said, the Association for Children with Disability have done some amazing work with their Youth Empowering Peers network. They've taken some of the resources and adapted them for young people. So this is a conversations by colour, where the young people, you know, they draw out lollies, and before they can eat the lolly, they have to answer questions, you know, like something, you know, I'm proud of, or somewhere, or something new I'd like to do. So just in terms of the Employ Me project, the project timeframe has been extended because of COVID, but not our funding. And we've had some interest in Tasmania to trial it for the autistic community. As I said, we're partnering with Brain Injury South Australia. So hopefully, Nick said that the next Brain Injury Conference is in South Australia in 2024. So hopefully I can come back and present with my colleague from Brain Injury South Australia on the Employ Me project. Thank you.
Just conscious of time, so
into my question time.
we have a little bit, unfortunately. But I'm sure Deb would love to have a chat afterwards if anyone's interested. So thank you. So I'd like to invite our last speaker. Pleasure to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
We just need to switch the slides. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're all good. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Do anything to make it go?
I think we do it over here. There we are. Thanks, Alex.
I do know what I'm doing. Promise. So a little bit of a change of pace, but I think follows on really nicely from the last presentation. I am a vocational rehabilitation counsellor, and I'm kind of an unusual person in this industry in that I've got a lived experience as a carer for a person with a traumatic brain injury. My dad sustained a severe traumatic brain injury just as I started university. So kind of come at this from a different perspective from a lot of the providers a lot of my clients have come across throughout their job seeking journey. And I wanted to talk to everybody today, especially for any of our participants in the room, about some ideas around how to actually practically talk about your brain injury when you're going into interviews with potential employers. And then if we've got any time left, to talk about where you can actually find some support for generating some ideas around how you might want to do that and apply these skills in your own circumstances. So where are we going to get started when we're job seeking? Well, kind of up to you. You might want to make sure you've got some clearance from your doctor that you're ready to return to work, that your family or your support people are on board with you beginning the return to work process. And I think, as we've touched on previously as well, how many hours a week are you ready to return to work? We're not probably looking at full-time for someone who's recovering from injury. You might want to look at, as our lovely gentleman in the video, 8 to 10 hours to start off with, and gradually ease yourself into it as you continue to recover. We're going to talk through some potential concerns that might be raised by employers or that you might have when you're talking about your brain injury with a potential employer. And then when you're job seeking within Australia, where are the sources of support? Where can you actually go, and what are the funding sources to get some help? So if we're unable to return to our pre-injury job, so we're talking now about the new track participants Philippa was working with, can you do something similar? Can you do something related with a new employer? Could you try returning to a job you might have done in the past? So maybe something that you've done 5 or 10 years ago if the job you had at the time of the injury isn't right for you anymore. You might want to talk to, if you're an NDIS participant, if you're on lifetime care, for example, having a vocational assessment with a rehab counsellor or a rehab psychologist to help you really identify that return to work goal. And this is something that we worked through. I was one of the VOC rehab providers involved with the VIP project. This was our starting point with the new track participants. What is going to be the most appropriate goal for you, given your skills, experience, and then your capacity for employment at the time? Reaching out to your network is a really powerful way of establishing yourself within the job seeking market. Do you know anyone that might have opportunities for employment? Have you got friends or family members who would be able to keep an eye out for opportunities for you? And you could also consider doing some volunteer work or some work experience. If you don't feel ready to commence paid employment, go and see if there's a community organisation in your area that might benefit from some of your skills or some of your unique insights into the role that you might have acquired through your recovery. So the biggest question, and probably the first question I get asked as a rehab counsellor when I meet a new client with an acquired disability who's looking to return to work is, do I disclose my injury to potential employers? Whoa, big one. Really hard to answer in 10 minutes, but we're going to try. And if I do it, when do I do it? So in terms of the do I disclose question, it's really up to you. It's your injury, it's your body, it's your journey. You have the right to choose whether or not you want to disclose your disability to employers. But you also need to consider the benefits of disclosing. I've got a spinal cord injury. You might have seen my funky yellow stick. I disclosed when I went for my most recent job because I've got some mobility issues. I need accessible parking. If I didn't talk to them about it, I actually physically can't get to the office. Now, it's a little bit easier when you've got quite a visible condition like I have. When it comes to traumatic brain injury, when you can't necessarily see it just by looking at the person, it can get a little bit trickier. Sometimes you need to actively make the decision to tell them. I got placed in that position when I attended my most recent job interview because I did it over Zoom. So all they could see was from here up. And you've got no idea I'm wearing a great big leg brace and carrying a yellow stick. So all of a sudden, ooh, this is what my clients are feeling when they're having this conversation. It was a weird role reversal, I can tell you. So choices for when we have this conversation. We might want to do it during the application process. Now, the downfall of doing that is the employer hasn't met you yet. So you might frighten them off if you're writing on your cover letter, "Hi, I'm Alexa and I've got a spinal cord injury. Give me a job." Ooh. Are you actually capable of doing this job? Do you have the skills we're looking for? They're not focusing on me and my skills and experience. They're focusing on the fact that I've got an injury. Do we talk to them during the interview? Now, this is where I usually encourage my clients to have the conversation and where I found personally having the conversation was the most impactful myself. Don't tell them right the first minute that you walk in. Wait until you're kind of 30, 40 minutes into the interview. Get them interested, get them hooked on, there's all of these great things I can do. Here's my strengths, here's my values. This is why I think I'm going to be a great match for your organisation. Or by the way, I might need flexible start times because sometimes I don't manage first thing in the morning. Or if I'm in a meeting, can I make sure I've got some notes ahead of time so that I can keep up with what's going on? Or, I've got some hearing issues. Maybe can you make sure I don't work in a great big echoey working open plan workspace? I need to work somewhere where I can actually manage that for myself. We try to steer away from telling the employer about the injury after you've started the job. Sometimes this can foster a sense of mistrust with the employer. Depends on the relationship you have with them though, and again, it's a very personal choice, down to the individual. But we'd usually steer away from telling them, on day one, "Oh, by the way, I've got all these access needs. I need these adaptations to the workplace." It's kind of too late for the employer to get those happening. It's also within your rights to never tell them, especially if you know and you're confident that you can do 100% of that job. You don't need to disclose your injury if you choose to do that. The downside of not telling them about your injury, though, if you have any accessibility needs that you need the employer to meet, They're not going to know if you haven't told them. So if you've got some hearing loss, for example, and you can hear on one side and not the other, your manager might be coming up to you on this side and giving you a set of instructions. You've got no idea they're giving them to you. Let them know. They can come on this side and you know what they're asking you to do. What happens if the employer asks? This is the other big question we get asked all the time. What if they ask if I've ever had a work-related injury? What if they ask me what I've been doing since my last job? It's been 5 years since I last participated in employment. How do I answer that? Why am I looking for work now? What's changed? What can you tell me about your injury? I can tell you personally, that's the question I get all the time. Walk in with a yellow stick. Oh, what have you done to yourself? None of your business, mate. It's got nothing to do with why I'm here. How do you know you can do this type of work? And why didn't you go back to your previous job? It's really helpful to have thought about how you're going to answer these kind of questions before you get into the interview. And if you're someone who's working with clients in a job like mine and you're helping to coach them through the employment process, take a picture of these questions, actually workshop them, role play them with your participants, and come up with a pre-prepared, like rehearsed answer so that when they get asked that question, they're not fumbling and they're not maybe accidentally disclosing more information that they want to give up. They're really comfortable with what they've decided. And I think it reflects back on our previous presentation as well. It's about owning that disclosure, making the choice to disclose when you're comfortable doing it. Some common concerns relating to return to work after brain injury. So this is a bit of a mixture of ones that employers and clients have reported to us. So some worries about not being able to manage the job. So as a person with brain injury returning to work, you might not have tried yet. So you might be worried about whether or not you're going to be able to manage. This is where volunteering, work trials, graded return to work, starting off small and building up can be really helpful. You might be worried, and this is something I hear all the time, isn't it dishonest not to tell them what's happened if they're going to employ me? If you're confident that you can do the job, if you're medically cleared to perform the job, if you've done the job since the brain injury and you know you can do it, you're not being dishonest by not telling them. You're just telling them that you're the best option for this particular role. Fears of re-injury is another valid concern. We see this a lot with people who've got a physical disability as well as the traumatic brain injury. You might have sustained some injury to your limbs or to your back. Are you going to be asked to do a job that's going to hurt you again? This is where you might want to disclose the injury so you can let them know, look, doctor says I can do most of it, but I can only lift up to 5 kilos now. So I just need to be a little bit careful. We could be worried about the possibility of discrimination. What happens if that employer decides they don't want to give me a job because I got a brain injury? Probably didn't want the job with them in the first place. How are they going to treat you once you get there? And the need to lean on colleagues for support. My response to that when I'm working with clients is we all lean on each other to support each other. I'm also a working mum. I have days where my kid's driven me crazy before I get to work, and I usually go and have a whinge over a cup of tea with one of my colleagues before we get started. This is a workplace, we're social beings, we all support each other. You might need support in different ways to your colleagues, but I'm sure you've got stuff that you could give them as well. Language is important. You need to focus on what you can do rather than your limitations. When I was a little baby rehab consultant and I'd only just started, I had this very, very tall client, and I can tell you I was very frightened of him. He was a very cranky man. And he used to come in every week and he'd say, I can't do this, Alexa. I can't. It's too hard. Everything hurts. I don't want to do that. Anyway, we keep working away. And one day he comes in and he's like, right. Oh, goodness, I'm frightened now. And he says, I've decided can't is a swear word. And I've told my wife, if I say can't, she'll slap me on the wrist. Okay. So he then changed his language. And instead of saying, I can't lift 5 kilos, he started saying, I can lift up to 5 kilos. Instead of saying, I can't work full time anymore, he started saying, I can work 20 hours a week. That's when he started getting job offers, because instead of going into an interview and sitting there like this and telling him about everything he couldn't do, he started emphasising his strengths and his abilities. It changed his whole perspective. I wish we'd done a DAS on him back at the time as well, because I bet his scores would have changed. Great little story that I keep telling clients now, years and years into the future. Change your language, focus on the positives. You can still tell someone you've got a restriction, you've got a limitation, you can't do something, without using the can't word all the time. Where do you get some help? So if you don't know where to start, if you can't go back to the job you had before the injury, there's lots of options available for job seeking support. Lots of these are associated in Australia with no upfront costs. So the NDIS, it's in its infancy, but they are now funding some vocational supports. If you speak to your NDIS support coordinator when you're having your next plan review, you might be able to get a vocational assessment in your next plan. Now, I will say take that with a grain of salt. I am an NDIS participant, and at my last planning meeting, she said to me, well, what do you do for a job? And I said, well, I'm a rehab counsellor. And she said, what's a rehab counsellor? So you might need to do a little bit of education of the people supporting you. They don't seem to quite be there yet to realise that this service is out there. Income protection depends on the policy that you bought when you took that policy out. You might have a vocational assessment and some job seeking support built into that policy. Centrelink, I think we've heard about this a few times this afternoon, ask for a referral to a DES provider for some job seeking support. If you're under workers' comp, CTP or lifetime care, lucky you, there will be funding available for a vocational assessment. The hospital burp teams that we've heard about again and the community rehab teams, there's some great links that have been developed through the vocational intervention program. Those links still exist. They will know someone through their networks that they'll be able to refer you to. The other source of information is through the ASORC website. So that's the Australian Society of Rehab Counsellors. If you Google ASORC, click on the contacts link, they have got a Find a Rehab Counsellor service. You just pop your postcode in and it'll bring you up some information about who's available within your area. And that's all I've got for you. I don't know if we've got time for questions. Okay. Sorry.